Now we're going to talk about wind deflection. Wind deflection is the main reason we miss our targets at distance, and it's more of an art form. It's not necessarily a perfect science. So we're just going to go through some methods and things that we look for in order to determine what our wind call needs to be. So there's three factors that we need to be concerned about when we're trying to make a good wind call. One of them is range to target. So range to target, it's not going to be the same as far as wind deflection goes for a 200-yard target that it will be for, say, a 1,000-yard target. Obviously, my bullet's a little bit faster, a little bit flatter trajectory in those early stages of flight, and I'm not going to necessarily have to compensate as significantly depending on what the conditions are. So range to target is important. Also, the obvious one is wind speed, so the actual velocity of the wind. I'm trying to determine how fast is this wind going. There's some methods that we use to do that. So wind speed is obviously important, but also direction. Based off the direction that the wind is coming from, we tend to discount that wind. So 12 o'clock is my direction of fire. So 12 o'clock where I'm actually oriented with my barrel, and when we're calling the wind speed where it's coming from, we're also using the clock method. So if it were to angle off into this direction, let's say it's a full value coming directly from my right, that would be a full value 3 o'clock wind. That's a 3 o'clock wind, whatever it might be. Let's just say 10 miles per hour. So I'm shooting at a target over here. That's my 12 o'clock. And I have a 3 o'clock, 10 mile per hour wind. So we reference the clock method in order to describe where the wind is coming from. Also with direction, we're going to discount the speed. So we'll go back to that 10 mile per hour wind. Let's say it was coming from my right, full value, 3 o'clock. That's going to be a 10 mile per hour wind. I'm going to use 10 miles per hour to try to figure what my wind call will be. But as that wind direction starts to change, if it were to creep up, let's say to 2 o'clock, that's going to be discounted based off of that slight angle change. So it's not going to be a 10 mile per hour wind anymore. It's going to be more of like an 8 mile per hour wind. Right? Same thing if the wind is coming directly in my face, 12 o'clock, or from behind me from the 6 o'clock, that's going to be no value. We call those winds no value. I'm not going to compensate in any direction based off of that, so long as that wind is actually coming directly in my face or directly behind me. Now this can get tricky here. This is where direction and speed become pretty important. So if I do have a 12 o'clock wind coming directly in my face, if that angles off to the 1 o'clock or the 12:30, that's automatically adding value. So I go from a center hold to the wind shifting, and now I need to do something. And depending on my range to target, that can be a very big deal and lead to a miss. So a directional change coming from the 12 or 6 o'clock, those slight direction changes, those are pretty important, and we have to really keep our eye on those. Now coming from the 3 o'clock, a full value from my right, or a 9 o'clock from my left, full value, if I get a speed change, that's going to be more significant. So that with that 10 mile per hour wind coming from my 3 o'clock, if that were to drift off and say come from the 2:30, well, that wind is still being valued at about a 9.5 mile per hour wind. So that's pretty similar to my original call. So it's not as significant with directional changes coming from those areas as it is with velocity changes. If that 10 mile per hour wind were to drop down to 5, that's obviously going to affect my bullet, and I'm going to need to compensate for that. So we have all of that in mind right now, and I'm shooting at a target from my location to 300 yards right now. Let's call it 300 yards. And it may be different. What the wind is actually doing at my location based off of what it's doing downrange may be different. I see this wind tape in front of me is completely dead. And if I go ahead and take a look in my optic at that target, I can see that I have a right to left going on down there, maybe about 3 to 4 miles per hour. But I'm going from a 0 mile per hour wind at my location to the wind is actually doing something at my target. So this is where the art form of wind calling comes into play, is I need to consider everything. It doesn't really matter what I feel at my location. It's important, yes, but that's only one piece of information. I need to look for several pieces of information between me and the target and come up with a good composition of what I need to do in order to compensate for that wind. So if the bullet is deflected even a little bit at my location, that obviously is going to be a big deal over distance. It's going to get amplified as that bullet is traveling downrange. Halfway between me and the target, the bullet is slowing down, and it's also reaching something called max ord. Max ord is the highest peak in the trajectory of our bullet, and we have something called wind gradients. So the wind speed can be doing something different down here next to the earth versus if I were to go 10 feet or 20 feet above the earth, the wind speed can reach higher velocities. It can be doing something different. And my bullet is flying that high at times in the trajectory, depending on how far out I'm shooting. So I need to consider that as well. What is the wind doing in that area? Look for pieces of information there. And then finally at the target, the bullet is obviously moving at its slowest pace in the trajectory. It's more susceptible to deflection from the wind. It's slower. So I obviously want to consider at my target, what is the wind doing, and really create a good idea for myself. What is the pattern in this area before I make a wind call and decide what I need to do. So some methods that we use to determine the wind speed is, we call it the felt on face method. So we use the vegetation or the natural indicators downrange. If we have wind tape, we can use that too. But the felt on face method is really referring to the natural indicators downrange. So 1 to 3 miles per hour, smoke will begin to drift. 3 to 5 miles per hour, we actually begin to feel the wind on our face. We can assume, okay, that's at a minimum 3 miles per hour, 3 to 5, potentially more. So we feel that on our face at 3 to 5. 5 to 8, the leaves on the trees are going to be in constant motion. So if there's a tree downrange and it has leaves on it, those leaves are going to be in constant motion at 5 to 8 miles per hour. 8 to 12, dust is going to start to kick up if it's a dusty environment, or if we have loose leaf paper in the area, that's all going to start to blow away and start to drift up on us, 8 to 12 miles per hour. And then 12 to 15, branches on trees are going to be in constant motion. So again, if we have a tree down there, the branches on that tree are going to be in constant motion. We can assume, okay, that's about 12 to 15 miles per hour, maybe more. After 15 miles per hour, it gets really tricky to gauge the wind speed because there's a lot of things happening downrange, and it's really hard to pinpoint what's actually going on. But the felt on face method is a good way for us to gain a sense of what's going on downrange. We also have artificial indicators or man-made indicators, such as the Kestrel. So the Kestrel here has a little propeller, and I can use that propeller to actually find the wind speed. And this is at my location. So this is great. This is a good piece of information, but it's simply just telling me wind speed at my location. That's good. That's one piece of a puzzle that I don't have to guess, right? I have that information exactly. So I can go ahead and use this. A method to use the Kestrel, a good one to find your direction, is to actually turn the Kestrel. I don't have any wind at my location right now, so that propeller isn't really moving on me. But if it was, I could turn the Kestrel until that propeller stopped moving, and then I know that that is the direction that the wind is coming from, and then I can go ahead and I can turn that Kestrel into the wind and then really get a sense of what the wind speed is using the Kestrel. So wind deflection is something that we need to be patient with ourselves with. It's not something that we go to the range one time and we learn and that's it. It's a perishable skill. We need to stay on top of it. It takes multiple times out at the range, getting to know our cartridge, getting to know the area that we're shooting in before we can get reasonable consistency and really understand what we're doing. A good way to practice this, if you do happen to have a Kestrel, is to just simply go for a walk and gauge the wind speed, try to figure out what it is, take a guess on what it is, and then just use the Kestrel to verify what is that actual wind speed. And then we can kind of get a sense of what things feel like at our location, and then we're starting to learn and become better at wind calling.